It was a Tuesday night that felt like a Thursday morning. You know the feeling. The energy in the arena had flatlined. We were 3 hours into a show that felt like it had been running for 3 days. The air was stale, recycled through massive vents that hummed louder than the audience. In the ring, the action was competent, technically perfect even, but it lacked a soul. It was wrestling by the numbers. The crowd wasn't booing. We're doing something far worse. They were checking their phones or looking at the exits. The collective consciousness of 20,000 people had checked out, convinced that the night was over, that the script was written, and that nothing, absolutely nothing, was left to surprise them. We live in an era where secrets don't exist. In the world of professional wrestling, the dirt sheets and the internet rumors usually spoil the surprise weeks in advance. If someone is at the airport, we know. If someone signs a contract, we see the ink dry in real time on social media. We have trained ourselves to be detectives, analyzing every tweet and every leak. So, as the main event dragged toward its inevitable, predictable conclusion, there was a sense of arrogant certainty in the building. We thought we knew everything. We thought the curtain was pulled back. We sat in our plastic chairs, comfortable in our boredom, completely unaware that the atmosphere was about to be pressurized. We were breathing calm air seconds before a vacuum ripped the roof off. The stillness wasn't peace. It was the water receding from the shore before the tsunami hits. And then the world stopped. It didn't happen with fireworks. It didn't happen with a catchy pop song blasting through the speakers. It happened with a blackout so sudden it felt like the power grid had failed. For a fleeting second, confusion reigned. Was this a technical glitch? A mistake? But then the fog rolled in. It wasn't the usual thin, wispy mist used for entrances. This was a wall, a thick, rolling lightning blast of fog that seemed to carry its own weather system. It poured over the stage, heavy and ominous, swallowing the ramp. The arena lights flickered strobe-like flashes, illuminating the thick clouds. Out of that digital storm, a silhouette emerged, just a shadow at first. A figure standing perfectly still against the chaotic swirling light. The posture was unmistakable. It wasn't the tentative walk of a rookie or the desperate stride of a mid-carder fighting for screen time. It was the stance of a queen returning to a kingdom she had burned down. The way she held her head tilted slightly back, absorbing the darkness, sent a primal signal to every brain in the building. The realization hit the audience in waves, ripple by ripple, from the front row to the nosebleeds. It defied logic. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was gone, retired, injured, exiled. The narrative didn't matter anymore. The logic of the real world dissolved. As she stepped forward, the fog parting around her legs like the Red Sea, the silence broke. It wasn't a cheer. It was a gasp. Collective intake of breath from 20,000 people, realizing they were witnessing a ghost walking in the flesh. Have you ever heard a sound that you can feel in your teeth? That is what happened next. It wasn't the high-pitched scream of excitement. It was the guttural roar of pure, unfiltered shock. It is a rare sound in modern entertainment. You're too cynical, too smart. But this was the sound of belief being restored. The commentary team, usually so composed, so ready with their pre-written catchphrases, went silent. You could see them on the monitors, standing up, looking at each other, not as employees, but as fans. The headsets were useless. No microphone could capture the audio distortion happening in that building. People were grabbing strangers next to them. Grown men were holding their heads, mouths agape, eyes wide, trying to process the visual data in front of them. It was a mass rejection of reality. It can't be her, they mouthed. She's miles away. She's done. But she kept walking. The noise evolved from shock into a chant, a rhythmic pounding of her name that shook the floorboards. It was primal. It was the sound of a tribe welcoming back its lost warrior. The barrier between the show and the audience evaporated. This wasn't a performance anymore. This was a moment of history occurring in real time, and everyone present knew instantly that they would be talking about this specific minute for the rest of their lives. The air pressure in the room actually changed. The heat rose. It was a physical manifestation of charisma, a reminder that one person, simply walking, can command the emotions of millions. But the true story wasn't in the crowd. It was inside the squared circle. The wrestler who had been standing there, the champion, the one who thought they owned the night, was now a statue. We often talk about acting in wrestling, but you cannot fake the physiological response to fear. You saw the color drain from the champion's face, as the bravado, the swagger, the rehearsed taunts they had prepared. It all disintegrated. They stood alone in the center of the ring, suddenly looking very small. The championship belt, usually held up as a shield of invincibility, hung loosely at their side, forgotten. This is the power of a true return. It shifts the gravity. The person in the ring had been the protagonist of the show for months. They were the main character. In 10 seconds, simply by the arrival of her, the champion was reduced to a supporting player, an extra in someone else's movie. You could see the realization in their eyes, the terrifying understanding that the hierarchy had just been rewritten without a single meeting or memo. She walked down that ramp, eyes locked on the ring, ignoring the thousands of screaming fans, tunneling her vision entirely on the person standing between the ropes. The walk was predatory. It was slow. It was the inevitable approach of consequence. For the wrestler in the ring, the bright lights felt like an interrogation lamp. There was nowhere to hide. The script was gone. They were out there alone, waiting for the storm to make landfall. While the arena was melting down, a different kind of chaos was erupting behind the curtain. The gorilla position, the nerve center of the show, just behind the entrance. Curtain is usually a place of controlled military precision. Producers count down seconds, directors call camera angles, and writers obsess over timing. But in this moment, the control room was a scene of beautiful panic. The headsets were exploding with chatter. Did you know who cleared this? Is the music cued? It became clear that this secret had been kept in a vault so deep, even the people running the show were questioning their own reality. Security guards who looked bored 5 minutes ago were now rushing to the barricades, unsure if they needed to protect the talent or the fans. The producers were scrambling to rewrite the ending of the show on the fly. You could feel the frantic energy of professionals realizing they were no longer in charge. The woman walking to the ring had hijacked the broadcast. There is a specific kind of electricity that runs through a production team when shoot elements reel. Unscripted moments bleed into the show. It's a mix of terror and exhilaration. They stopped looking at their run sheets and started watching the monitors like everyone else. The carefully crafted timeline of the episode was shattered. Commercial breaks were canceled. This was live TV in its most dangerous form. The meticulously built structure of the corporate machine had been dismantled by the presence of one rogue element. Deeper backstage, in the locker room, the vibe was heavy. This is the side of the story the cameras never show. For the other wrestlers on the roster, this return wasn't just a cool moment. It was a threat. Every spot on the card is fought for. Every minute of airtime is a war. When a legend returns, when a force of nature comes back to reclaim her yard, everyone else gets pushed down a rung on the ladder. You could sense the shift in the ecosystem. The young up-and-comers, who had been convinced that this was their era, suddenly looked like children again. They gathered around the monitors, towels draped over their heads, sweat cooling on their skin, watching in silence. There was jealousy. Yes, there is always jealousy in this business. But beneath the envy was a begrudging, terrifying respect. They knew what she had sacrificed. They knew the injuries she had rehabbed in silence. They knew the politics she had navigated. To walk out there, after everything, required a level of mental fortitude that few possess. The locker room wasn't cheering. They were studying. They were analyzing the way she moved, the way she commanded the light. It was a masterclass being delivered in real time. The veterans nodded, recognizing a peer. The rookies stared, realizing just how high the mountain actually was. The hierarchy of the locker room, usually determined by wins and losses, was instantly reorganized based on aura alone. She hadn't thrown a punch yet, but she had already defeated half the roster mentally. The arena was loud, but the digital world was deafening. In the pocket of every fan, the devices were burning up. The moment her face appeared on the screen, the internet broke. Twitter timelines froze. Trending topics shifted instantly from global politics and sports scores to just one name. It was a digital wildfire that jumped continents in seconds. Fans in Tokyo, London, and New York, who had been asleep or working, were waking up to notifications that seemed impossible. She is back. 3 words that carried the weight of a gospel. Video clips, blurry and shaken, filmed from the crowd, began circulating with millions of views within minutes. The grainy footage only added to the mystique-like footage of a cryptid or a UFO, proving that the impossible had happened. The wrestling community, often divided and toxic, became singular in its shock. There were no arguments about booking or work rate in those first few minutes. There was only the shared human experience of surprise. Podcasts went live immediately. YouTubers scrapped their planned videos to hit record, screaming into their webcams. It was a reminder that even in a fragmented media landscape, a single, powerful moment can still unite the world in a synchronicity of awe. The return didn't just happen in the ring. It happened on millions of screens, creating a shared global memory that transcended time zones. Far away from the flashing lights and the screaming fans, in a quiet living room, a different story was unfolding. This was the human cost of the return. Her family sat on the couch, watching the TV with a mix of pride and terror. They knew the truth. They knew the mornings where she couldn't get out of bed because her back was seized up. They knew the doctor's appointments, the surgeries, the late-night doubts where she whispered that maybe it was over. They had seen the scars that the makeup covered. To the world, she was a superhero, an invincible character made of Teflon. To them, she was fragile, human, and deeply loved. They watched her walk down that ramp, not as a fan watching a star, but as a family watching a survivor. They saw the micro-expressions that the cameras missed, the slight hesitation in her step, the way she protected her bad shoulder, the deep breath she took to steady her nerves. They weren't cheering for her to win a match. They were praying for her to come home in one piece. This section of the story adds the weight that makes the shock meaningful. It wasn't just a return to a job. It was a return to a war zone that had almost claimed her before. The pure shock for the audience was entertainment. The shock for her family was the relief that she had actually made it back to the place she loved, despite every obstacle the universe had thrown in her path. She entered the ring. She didn't attack. She didn't hit her finisher. She simply asked for a microphone. The music cut, and the silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with anticipation. 20,000 people held their breath. When she raised the mic to her lips, you could see the tremor in her hand. That tiny, involuntary shake was the most real thing in the entire show. It betrayed the emotion she was trying to hide behind her warrior mask. She looked around the arena, making eye contact with the darkness, drinking it in as if it were water and she had been dying of thirst. "I didn't think I would ever see this again," she whispered, her voice cracked. It wasn't the booming voice of a promo. It was the fragile voice of a person confessing a secret. That crack in her voice broke the barrier completely. The crowd didn't chant "what?" or try to hijack the segment. They listened. She spoke not of titles or rivalries, but of the darkness of being away. She spoke of the silence of retirement, the loss of identity, the feeling of being a ghost in her own life. It was a confession. The shock of her physical return was replaced by the emotional shock of her vulnerability. She stripped away the character and gave them the person. In that moment, the Empress died, and the human being stood revealed, raw and bleeding emotionally in front of the world. And here is the twist. The ending we didn't see coming. We expected a fight. We expected her to clothesline the champion and raise the belt. That is how these stories always end, right? But she didn't throw a punch. She didn't challenge for the title. She looked at the terrified champion, the one clutching the belt, and she simply nodded. A nod of respect. A passing of the torch. No, a recognition of shared suffering. The shock wasn't that she was back to take over. The shock was realizing she was back to say goodbye properly. The twist was that this wasn't the start of a new reign of terror. It was the beginning of a closure she had been denied. She hadn't come back to defeat the roster. She had come back to defeat her own regrets. As she turned and looked at the crowd one last time, with tears finally spilling over, the audience understood. This wasn't about wrestling. It was about reclaiming the pen to write the final chapter of your own life on your own terms. The fog, the lightning, the entrance, it wasn't hype. It was a victory lap for a spirit that refused to fade away in the dark. The show went off the air not with a brawl, but with lingering shot of her standing in the center of the ring, finally, truly, at peace.